What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with the box office status report for MLK Weekend, where there's currently an ongoing battle for the #1 spot heading into the weekend. 28 years later, the Bone Temple was projected to open to around 20 million, pushing Avatar: Fire and Ash out of the top spot. However, due to reasons we'll get into shortly, according to Deadline's current analysis, it appears as if the Bone Temple will miss projections and open to only around 15 million, roughly half of what its predecessor opened to last summer. One of many reasons why people are eyeing this face-off so closely is that the first two Avatar films both managed to maintain the #1 spot for 7 weekends in a row, and there's still a chance that Fire and Ash might do the same, although I think crossing the 2 billion mark is now totally out of the question. The movie is currently at 1.3 billion globally and slowing down very quickly, meaning that Zootopia 2 will officially be the box office champion of 2025, something I could have never imagined going into 2025. However, we live in strange and interesting times. In any case, there are a lot of interesting topics this weekend, including Marty Supreme becoming A24's biggest movie domestically, as well as the successful re-release of Fellowship of the Ring. But let's slow down a bit and take them all one at a time. So let's start with the obvious. It's a holiday weekend and the numbers could still change. However, when it comes to Anthony D'Alessandro over at Deadline, his margin for error tends to be very small. Also, when a movie is losing momentum, any modifications tend to go in a negative direction. So I think the chances are slim that the Bone Temple will make a last-minute comeback. But the reason we're doing this breakdown now instead of tomorrow is because I have a conflict during the day tomorrow, and starting tomorrow night, we'll be going all in on the latest George R. R. Martin show, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which looks absolutely fantastic.
They charged me to be a good knight, to defend the weak and the innocent, and I swore that I would.
But just to give people a little bit of context, here's how the Bone Temple's opening weekend compares to previous entries in the franchise. Back in 2002, 28 Days Later opened to 10 million with an $8 million budget. 28 Weeks Later opened to 9.7 million in 2007. 28 Years Later opened to 30 million in 2025, but that had a budget of 60 million. And the Bone Temple looks like it's going to open to around 15 million with a slightly higher budget of 63 million. And here's what Anthony D'Alessandro had to say in his Saturday AM update. It's looking like James Cameron's Na'vi are scaring off Sony's Infected at the MLK box office as 20th Century Studios' Avatar: Fire and Ash is on its way to a 17.6 million 4-day fifth weekend, while 28 years later the Bone Temple is coming in way under its $20 million plus tracking projections with 15 million. Rivals see it much lower. At a 3-day of 13.2 million, it's the second highest opening in the Danny Boyle, Alex Garland franchise after last June's 28 years later, 30 million. Those numbers for the Bone Temple are a disappointment. Not Sony, not theaters, not anybody wanted to see the movie at that level, especially as the sole MLK weekend opener. On the positive side, the Nia DaCosta directed, Alex Garland penned, and Danny Boyle produced fourth title in the British zombie series gets an A- cinema score and a very good 72% definite recommend on Screen Engine/ComScore's post-track, which is better than the B cinema score and 52% definite recommend on 28 years later. Will positive word of mouth kick in? I don't know. So let's pause there and discuss, because 28 years later, the Bone Temple got great reviews by critics, got a great audience score over on Rotten Tomatoes, got a very high cinema score, so when everything is seemingly going right for a movie, where did it go wrong? And I have a few theories. Once again, these are just one person's opinion. These are just theories. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I think part of it, or one of the factors, is that 28 years later last summer had a mixed response. I thought 28 years later had a brilliant first half and a lackluster second half, where tonally it just seemed to be going in a lot of different directions at once. And I know technically these movies aren't zombie movies, they're the rage virus, but when people go to see a zombie movie, what they're expecting is to be terrified and grossed out basically from start to finish. And anytime you start getting into kind of a strange, kind of silly, off-putting tone, well then you're going to alienate some people and they say, you know what, maybe I won't come back for the next one. So I think there is some spillover negativity from the mixed response from the previous movie. Now, as far as having a different director is concerned, first and foremost, Nia DaCosta makes much better movies when she's not working for Marvel. However, there's a small niche audience that's probably all too aware that Nia DaCosta directed The Marvels, which is the lowest performing movie in the history of the MCU. And so while sometimes it's easy to assume that everybody's following all the ins and outs of like the behind the scenes and who's directing what and who's writing what, I think that the number of people out there who are aware that Nia DaCosta, the director of The Bone Temple, is the same director as The Marvels, it's probably very small, but I imagine some of those people said, you know what, I saw The Marvels, it fucking sucked, and I'm staying home. But my final theory is based on my own experience and my own opinion, because I was one of the few people out there who didn't particularly enjoy 28 years later, The Bone Temple. While I found many individual scenes and many individual performances like worthy of praise, overall, the movie was gory, but it wasn't scary. And 28 Days Later, back in 2002, was scary as fucking shit. Like, it had me recoiling violently in my chair and like leaping out of my seat. It was a true seat jumper movie, totally revolting, and just a mean and lean, little down and dirty, nasty horror movie, and it basically played a large role in resurrecting the zombie genre in the early 2000s. It actually, I would say, it was like the principal cause alongside Shaun of the Dead, as well as the remake of Dawn of the Dead. Then obviously The Walking Dead came along, and suddenly zombies were everywhere again. But 28 Days Later was scary as fucking shit. 28 years later, The Bone Temple has a lot of silliness, and I'm going to be going into some spoiler light territory, so if you have not seen the movie, bail out now, or at least bail out for the next 60 seconds to 120 seconds. But if you have a scene where, like early on in the movie, where Ray Fiennes, once again, last spoiler warning, 3, 2, 1, but if you have a scene early on in the movie where one of the main characters, Ray Fiennes, is dancing with a naked man with a 12-inch cock, where the entire audience was kind of tittering and giggling and like, you know, basically kind of like laughing at, I don't know if they're laughing at the movie's expense, but they're definitely laughing. Like, everybody's laughing for their own reasons. That dispels the atmosphere of horror. It's hard to be terrified when Ray Fiennes is dancing with a guy with an anaconda swinging back and forth, like, you know, something like hanging in a clock. I was like, well, this is a different tone from 28 Days Later. And then toward the end of the movie, the big scene that everybody's ranting and raving about and screaming about is the big Iron Maiden sequence. And I'm not an Iron Maiden enthusiast, but I looked up the name of the song, and it is called The Number of the Beast. But there's a big scene where he's basically performing for all the Jimmies and trying to act like he's the devil, and Jimmy's the son of the devil, and blah, blah, blah. And if you're into Iron Maiden and heavy metal and that sort of thing, I'm sure everybody was having a good time. But once again, they're having a good time, not a rough time. And I feel like when you go to see a 28 days, weeks, or years later movie, you expect to be fucking terrified. And giving people like a rush of like adrenaline and excitement toward the end of the movie, it allows them basically like an escape hatch where they're no longer terrified, they're no longer emotionally invested in the horror of the movie. And that makes it very difficult for word of mouth to spread, where people can honestly say, dude, you got to go see this movie. It's going to scare the fucking pants off you. Because, yeah, there was not a single scene where I was nervous. There were a few scenes where I was kind of like, ugh, that's kind of gross. But like, gore in the absence of horror can take you into a very different genre very quickly. And a perfect example would be Peter Jackson's film Dead Alive from the 1990s. One of the goriest films ever made. However, it's hilarious from start to finish. And it's got zombies and decapitations and, you know, lawnmower like sequences, everything you could possibly imagine. And you're just laughing yourself silly the entire time. And I love Dead Alive, but it's a very different experience from what was being kind of offered or being advertised by the trailers for 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. And I think in the end, the reason this movie is underperforming is because it's appealing to a niche crowd that 100% absolutely loves and adores the experience that is being served up by 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. However, Sony's trying to build an enduring, long-lasting franchise within the horror genre. Within first and foremost, they need to deliver the scares before anything else. In any case, I imagine there's going to be a pretty lively debate as to why The Bone Temple is underperforming relative to 28 Years Later. I guess another thing to keep in mind is that last summer when 28 Years Later came out, it had been a long time since we'd had another movie set in that world. And that first trailer for 28 Years Later was one of the coolest trailers I've ever seen. Like, they should have just released the trailer in the theater and not the movie, because that trailer was so goddamn good. It gave you chills up and down your neck and arms. And I think a similar thing is happening to Avatar: Fire and Ash, where people only had to wait 3 years for another Avatar movie, whereas The Way of Water, they had to wait like 13 years. But with 28 Years Later, it was only June of last year when the last one came out. And if a movie has a mixed response after one of the greatest trailers ever made, and then you release a sequel like 7 months later, I think it's unrealistic to expect that the movie is going to outperform what came before. But let's move on to some other films, and let me know what you think down below as to why The Bone Temple seems to be coming in at roughly half of 28 Years Later. Meanwhile, Avatar: Fire and Ash should arrive at a running global cume that's north of $1.3 billion, while Zootopia 2 should come in around $1.68 billion worldwide. Zootopia 2, by end of Monday, looks to be less than $7 million away from crossing $400 million at the domestic box office. The entire Friday to Monday MLK weekend is coming around $102 million for all movies, which is up 8% from last year's $94.2 million, but the third best take for the holiday stretch post-COVID. 2023 is being the best when the fifth weekend of Avatar: Way of Water and the second weekend of Megan ruled. And then he includes a list of the top 10 for the weekend, which has a few surprises in it, so let's take them one at a time. Let's start with The Housemaid, which has now made more than $100 million domestically and more than $200 million worldwide off a budget of $35 million. That is serious money. And if you've been following this channel for any stretch of time, I've been banging the drum for years that the erotic thriller needs to make a comeback because the movies are inexpensive to make, but when they hit big. And a perfect example would be a movie like Fatal Attraction or Basic Instinct. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, we had tons of great erotic thrillers. And I've done videos on this channel about my top 10 favorites from the 1980s as well as the 1990s. Once again, I've been banging the drum, and I'll include a link to those videos down in the description below. But The Housemaid is proof that Sydney Sweeney can be big box office if you put her in like trashy, sleazy, erotic thrillers as opposed to art house movies. Stop trying to make her do like character-driven dramas and going after the Oscar and that sort of thing. Sydney Sweeney should be going after big box office. Put her in movies like Barbarella, Queen of the Galaxy, which is a remake they keep talking about but they never seem to make. That is the kind of movie that Sydney Sweeney should be making. Or a movie like Basic Instinct, or a movie like Fatal Attraction. Movies where she can, show off the va-va-voom factor, which is a factor that has been exploited repeatedly by a show like Euphoria. And one of the main reasons people got so excited for the season 3 trailer for Euphoria was seeing her all dressed up with like the furry ears and the little thing on her nose. I was like, oh my God, this show's going to be so perverted. But they know the asset that they have on their hands, and they know what people want to see. So congratulations to Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried and the smash hit of the Housemaid. It is a rare win for Lionsgate, which has struggled in recent years, but hopefully they'll take this lesson to heart and give us a lot more erotic thrillers in the future. But we also have Marty Supreme at number 5, which according to this article has now reached 81.1 million domestic. And according to Anthony D'Alessandro, he says by Saturday, the Timothee Chalamet Awards contender will surpass Everything Everywhere All at Once's 77.1 million to become A24's highest grossing movie at the domestic box office. And I've said this before on the channel, and I'll say it again. Like, what is a movie star? For me, a movie star is somebody who can put butts in seats irrespective of the movie or the franchise or the subject matter or the genre. And Timothee Chalamet over the last couple of years, whether he's playing Paul Atreides or Bob Dylan or Willy Wonka or now Marty, has generated box office across the board. He's becoming one of the most consistent Hollywood stars of his generation, and there are not a lot of stars of his generation that can lay claim to generating big box office. Although Sydney Sweeney in The Housemaid is proving that she can generate box office in the right vehicle, but Timothee Chalamet, yeah, he is a full-blown young movie star. He's part of a very, very rare breed, and high five to him, high five to Josh Safdie, high five to everybody in A24 who got behind this movie because they're being rewarded for their efforts. But for me, the most interesting bit of news and the most exciting bit of news from this top 10 is seeing The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring back in the top 10 after 25 years, which proves to me that J.R.R. Tolkien adaptations can still generate big box office if and only if you try to adapt his work in the spirit in which it was created. And we can debate to what degree Fellowship of the Ring is in the spirit of Tolkien, but I think it's one of the best movie adaptations we will ever see based on his books. And I'll include a link in the description to my video where I discuss my favorite J.R.R. Tolkien adaptations in animation, live action, and video games. And if you look over my shoulder, you'll see basically all the books that he ever wrote. I'm obsessed with J.R.R. Tolkien. However, nothing makes my vision get read faster than a show like The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, or that idiotic animated film, War of the Rohirrim, or when you see terrible video games like, what was that Gollum video game? That was one of the worst reviewed video games ever made. But yeah, we're drowning in terrible Tolkien adaptations, and I feel like adapt his books as written to the best of your ability, or leave them alone. And as I always say when it comes to Peter Jackson's 6 movies set in the world, I can basically set aside his 3 Hobbit films and I can just watch the 1977 animated film by Rankin and Bass, which I absolutely love. But as far as the Lord of the Rings trilogy is concerned, I think that Return of the King has the best peaks or the best highs, but it's the most inconsistent of the 3. The Two Towers, I thought it was the weakest when it came to the theatrical, but I think the extended version of The Two Towers makes a lot of improvements. But my favorite movie that Jackson ever made set in the world of J.R.R. Tolkien was the theatrical cut of Fellowship of the Ring. And I don't want to relitigate or regurgitate everything that I said in my video, which I'm linking below. But there are scenes in The Fellowship of the Ring where both my heart and my spirit just absolutely soar, where I just feel complete and total glee and euphoria. It's everything that blockbuster filmmaking should be about in the 21st century. So I'm just relieved to see that the audience is still there. So for everybody out there who's working on the next terrible video game or show or movie that tries and fails to adapt the world of J.R.R. Tolkien, please just fuck right off. get back to adapting the books to the best of your ability, or just leave them alone. And what has never been done, and probably will never be done, is a great adaptation of the first age of J.R.R. Tolkien, where basically, if you read the Silmarillion, the great majority of it is the first age, and like the last fifth or sixth of it is concerned with the second age. But there are so many incredible stories in the first age that would make beautiful, epic movies, like the story of Beren and Luthien, or the story of Turin Turambar, which is probably the darkest, most tragic, most bleak story that J.R.R. Tolkien ever wrote. But if you read the Silmarillion, you have all these epic sagas that are contained within the first age, all of which would make incredible movies, but they would be expensive, and they would need an old-fashioned classic aesthetic, not a modern aesthetic, if you're going to do it right. And so maybe it's better if people just read the books and look at the great art and enjoy the great audio fiction. But maybe it's better if people just leave the first stage alone, because 99 out of 100 filmmakers alive today would completely and totally butcher it. But just as a way of wrapping up this video, I want to take this opportunity to complain about the double feature that I saw on Thursday. I started my Thursday at an AMC where I saw 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, and then I finished my Thursday at a Regal where I saw the new animated film All You Need Is Kill, which is a fresh adaptation of the manga that was originally adapted as the live-action movie Edge of Tomorrow. But I had negative experiences theatrically with both theaters. At the AMC, I counted it, there were 4 separate AMC commercials that played one after another before the movie finally started. And some are about, some are like the Nicole Kidman one, and some are about AMC awards programs, and some are just about going to the movies in general. AMC, if you're listening, you don't need 4 commercials in a row. One commercial that summarizes everything about AMC would be more than adequate, but you're already wasting a half hour of our time waiting for the movie to start with too many commercials and too many trailers, and it's a negative experience. It makes people not want to go back to AMC theaters. So that's my complaint number one. But then when I saw All You Need Is Kill over at the Regal, I think I found what is arguably the smallest screening room in all of New York. I was at the Regal at Union Square, where the theater had 5 rows. It was 2 rows in a gap and 3 rows, and there were 6 or 7 people in there. But the screen was barely bigger than my phone. I mean, I was sitting front row, so at least it appeared big just due to my proximity to the screen. But it's if you want people to pay $25 to go see your shitty movie in your shitty theater, the screen needs to be larger than your average iPhone. And so I get it when people say, you know what, I'm happy just to wait for movies to show up on a streaming service or to get a video on demand or whatever the case might be. And it didn't help that All You Need Is Kill was, at best, a mixed experience. It had some killer action scenes, but it's probably a fresh adaptation of a manga that did not need to be made. And it made some changes, which I didn't really like as well. But in any case, now that the first quarter of the 21st century is in our rearview mirror, it's time to have a frank, honest conversation about the theatrical experience moving forward. And I think the big premium experience of Dolby Cinemas and IMAX and that sort of thing will remain incredibly competitive and viable and exciting. I'm sure that the Odyssey is going to do insanely well this summer. But I think it might be time to revisit the discussion or revisit the idea of selling tickets to a room that's barely bigger than your car, where 6 or 7 people can have a shared experience of watching a movie. I just found it to be a little bit ridiculous. But coming up, what have we got going on? Tomorrow, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which I'm very excited about. And the new Chris Pratt movie, Mercy, is coming out next week. I'm really struggling to get excited to go see Mercy, but maybe I'll go, maybe I won't. And I've got an early access screening to the new Sam Raimi movie, Send Help, next Saturday. I think the trailer looks like complete and total shit. However, Sam Raimi is one of the directors who got me obsessed with movies back in high school, so I'll go into it with the best of intentions, but prepared for the worst. But I hope you enjoyed this box office breakdown. Let me know what you think down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and I'll be back in your face tomorrow evening with my review for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1 premiere. But until then, onwards and upwards.